issues here. Welcome to the Women's March Canada podcast, making the equality of women in Canada the new norm. This is episode number 24, entitled Inclusivity and Arts. My name is Melissa Durrell, and I'm your host, inspiring, uniting, and leading the charge for the advancement of women across Canada. Our guest today is Lauren Weinberg. We're going to give her a warm welcome. First, we've got to tell you all about her. Lauren is the founder of Open Sesame, a commercial gallery, book, and design shop in downtown Kitchener. And before moving to Kitchener, she was an arts journalist for Time Out Chicago. And Lauren has a background in design and history from the Parsons School of Design. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
So Lauren, tell me a little bit about how you went from being an American to becoming, to living here in Canada.
Sure. Back in 2014, my husband, who's a mathematician, was teaching at Northwestern University just outside Chicago, and someone invited him to come give a talk at the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics. And he came home so excited about the people who he met at PI and the opportunities for collaborating with scholars there. They offered him a job, and he was really eager to move. I had been laid off from my job in journalism in Chicago, and I think was ready for a change. And we had our older daughter was a toddler at the time, and we were starting to worry about where we could send her to school in Chicago, what we were going to do for daycare. And it seemed like we could have a better quality of life in Waterloo. And we're definitely the kinds of people who always joked about moving to Canada from America. And my husband is actually Irish, so he was not really emotionally invested in staying in the United States. So we were very happy to move someplace with universal health care and more reasonable gun laws. And so we came here in July 2014, and it's worked out very well. I guess Kevin is still extremely happy at PI, and now we have 2 daughters, and they really appreciate being able to have a house and a yard here, and living really close to all their friends. So it's so far it's panned out the way we hoped.
So I know the business that you opened up. Let's talk a little bit about Open Sesame. So for those people from East Coast to West Coast, what is Open Sesame?
Sure. So Open Sesame is a combination gallery and design shop, and we also have a particular focus on books about art and design and children's books that are I'd say just kind of really special in terms of their art and design. And it came about because when I was reporting on visual art in Chicago, it's a place where there are a lot of unusual art spaces. A lot of art students will open galleries in their apartments, which are kind of unofficial. There are a lot of galleries that host musical performances, stores that have art exhibitions. And so having a hybrid space didn't seem that strange. And when my family moved here, we found that there just weren't a lot of stores that had the kinds of products we wanted, and there certainly wasn't a commercial gallery showing the kind of art that I really wanted to see. And so I thought it might be interesting to open my own space. And some of it too is that I wasn't sure sort of what to do, in KW. I knew that I wasn't going to find a job as a journalist. And I guess I liked the idea sort of at this point in my career of being my own boss.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate, and a friend of mine who worked for the city of Kitchener happened to know that there was a storefront that was part of the Kitchener City Hall complex that was vacant. And the city really wanted to find some kind of business or organization that would have something to do with culture and activate the downtown, which can be kind of quiet at night and on the weekends, and just give people a reason to come downtown. So that fit right in with kind of what I was hoping my art space would be. And I was also lucky because one of the first friends I met here was a local artist, Sarah Kernahan, who used to be the artistic director of Kafka, Kitchener's Public Art Biennial. And Sarah she's from London, Ontario. She did her undergrad at OCAD in Toronto. Then she did her master's degree at the University of Waterloo. So she was an experienced curator, and she had contacts among artists kind of all across Ontario, or Southern Ontario. And so Sarah has sort of been my partner in this. And I knew that, she could put together really solid exhibitions. I felt based on sort of my educational and professional experience that I could kind of pull all the products together that I wanted for the store. And that was how it happened. And I knew my family lives in Uptown Waterloo, and I knew from our neighbors, from my husband's colleagues at Perimeter, from the people I was meeting in the art community here, I felt that there would be an audience for the kinds of products that I hope to sell. And I thought it's, you know, it's silly for people to think that they have to go to Toronto or that they always have to buy things online. It would be nice just to have a place where they can find all this in person, and also a place where they can just meet like-minded people. Because I guess people often complain to me that they're, especially when they first move to KW, that they're just not sure where to find other people who are interested in the arts, how to figure out kind of what's happening in town. And so that, I think from the beginning, that's what we hoped, you know, our events would do, just sort of bring people together.
So I love the fact that they're both women that are running this organization. And when you look around, do you find that it's about 50-50 women to men working in arts around this community?
I think maybe more like 2/3 women, 1/3 men, for sure.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I think that seems to be kind of across the board. I think more and more people in art school and people at especially at the lower levels of arts organizations are mostly female. And I think some of that has to do with the salaries that are offered, you know, in that sector. Same for nonprofits. So one thing that's a little unfortunate, I think, is you'll often see that the director of an organization may be male, and then sort of all of the staff below him will be female. That's not the case in KW. Like the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery's director, Shirley Medill, is a woman. So there are definitely a lot of like awesome, you know, powerful women in our arts community. But yeah, I'd say the arts, I think, are more and more female dominated, but not at the highest levels, which is very frustrating.
I was talking to someone the other day, and they were talking about, you know, when you're breaking through the glass ceiling, you're going to get a little bloody.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that that's something that you're having to do right now?
Not so much. I'd say I think our problem is a bit different, and that maybe there are actually women who work in the nonprofit sector in KW and in sort of the art sector, which often is the nonprofit sector, are kind of facing the same issue, which I think I don't see women in those fields getting much respect, especially someplace like Kitchener-Waterloo, as say men in the tech sector. Even though when I think about who's making Kitchener-Waterloo livable, I think it's mostly a lot of women who are working or even volunteering for arts institutions and nonprofit institutions, you know, like Kitchener Public Library or something like that. But they are not the people who are really being celebrated and paid attention to.
I love that you brought that up, because I think that that's something that's happening culturally across our country. This idea that it's almost sort of STEM versus arts in a way. Tell me about that.
I guess it's sort of frustrating to me. I mean, obviously STEM is very important, and, you know, I would be delighted if my daughters wanted to go into STEM fields, and there's clearly a huge need to, you know, encourage girls to be interested in STEM and stay in STEM. But you know, whenever I read, I guess, about what a lot of sort of tech companies do, or, you know, kind of like sort of like famous tech CEOs like Elon Musk, I'm like, why is this person a hero to so many people? Or, you know, it's like, I don't really see what they're contributing to society. And I mean, my heroes are my daughter's daycare teachers, frankly. And, you know, why aren't they being compensated for the important work that they're doing? You know, I would love to see some of these startup employees try to deal with a classroom of 25 3-year-olds. And so I think our societal priorities are kind of out of whack. And I don't mean to, I shouldn't denigrate the work that these companies are doing, though, because a lot of tech companies and companies working in science are doing extremely important work. But it's frustrating to me that I think we're looking to them to sort of solve all of our problems. And I feel like some of the voices of, you know, women who have maybe spent decades providing social services or, you know, working in the arts, they just don't seem to be as in demand.
So do you like this movement where we're now calling it STEAM? So we've added arts into the science, technology, and you've thrown arts in there. What do you think about that? Is that just a way to placate arts, or is it
a little bit? I think it's kind of shallow. I think that sometimes, of course, you know, art and technology can go together. And the museum here recently has a really interesting exhibition about art that incorporates technology. And I know people who are interested in both science and art. So I think they can dovetail in really fascinating, important ways. And I know Perimeter, has sometimes paired artists with the scientists there, and those have been really fruitful collaborations. But sometimes art is not necessarily going to have a relationship to STEM, and I think that's okay. And I guess I just wish that the arts and humanities were not being discounted, even though it's kind of harder to quantify their impact. Like, just because you can't count it doesn't mean it's not there and it's not important.
That's very interesting. I mean, I work with a lot of tech companies, but I'm a communications person. So when people ask me, do I work in tech? I say yes, because I spend a lot of my time teaching engineers how to speak, essentially. But at the end of the day, I'm an arts girl. Like, I'm a journalist. That's what I do. So I think that what you're saying is really interesting. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about some of the things that you're doing in your gallery.
Sure. So I think when Sarah Kernahan and I, sort of thought about the mission of our exhibitions program, we knew that we mostly wanted to highlight local artists because the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery, which is our local museum, is fantastic. And I think they try to showcase local artists as much as they can, but they're also hosting exhibitions from all over Canada, and I think trying to create a dialogue with people from outside. We wanted to be a place where artists from Waterloo Region could show their work. And we were looking for people who weren't necessarily doing something incredibly commercial, whose work was interesting in kind of a conceptual way. And that's sort of mostly who we've shown. And we've definitely tried to have, I'd say, well over 50% female artists. We've definitely tried to be as inclusive as possible. Although, of course, there's always room for improvement. And so we've shown some people who got their master's degrees at the University of Waterloo. One thing that's interesting is I think more and more people who are graduating from the arts program there are trying to stay in Kitchener-Waterloo as, say, Toronto becomes kind of unaffordable for people. And they're trying to sort of figure out what kind of career they can make here. So we've showcased people kind of in that situation. We've also been lucky enough to have exhibitions with some mid-career artists from Waterloo Region who are really respected. And then some artists from elsewhere who we thought could just have an interesting dialogue with the artists who are here. We've mostly shown painting and drawing, just I think partly because of our space constraints, but we've also done some photography, and we're going to show sculpture for the first time, I guess, next month. So that's pretty exciting. And and we've occasionally been able to collaborate with some nonprofits here, and that's been something that's really rewarding. We've ended up teaming up with Kafka Kitchener's Public Art Biennial on a window display that's kind of like, we're going to have, I guess, probably about 4 works of art a year that will be, they're actually just literally sort of, they look like ads that are in our windows, and we're getting artists to kind of take advantage of, that kind of location and the fact that people sort of assume, we're across the street from a Shoppers Drug, and to kind of take advantage of the fact that people might sort of think they're looking at an ad before they actually realize they're looking at an artwork. So we've collaborated with Kafka, we've been able to collaborate with Kitchener Public Library, and, some music groups like Open Ears who've been able to have events in our space. And so I found that's really important, that I think especially somewhere like KW, which is a small city, that you need to kind of team up with all the other sort of small arts groups and nonprofits. And then that's one way that everyone can help each other.
It's interesting to me because you're American. Are you from Chicago then? Is that where you're?
I'm actually from New York City.
New York City.
Yeah,
you are a big city girl. But you've come into this, I guess we're Canada's 10th largest city, but we're under 1 million people. But what you've done is you've really rooted down, and in 4 short years, you've really rooted down into the community. And I think that that's really incredible. I mean, is that just who you are, or is that arts? Is that the arts community?
I think it's largely the arts community. I mean, maybe one thing about having the arts be a little bit of an underdog is that when you move to a place like that and people realize this is something you care about, they really welcome you with open arms. Whereas, you know, Chicago has a huge, well-established art scene, and so people were, you know, kind of like, when I moved there, and like, when I left. And here, I think people really feel it, you know, when someone new comes to town or someone decides to leave, it has a huge impact. And so that's something that's been really rewarding about living here, feeling like I was able to meet all these people and they were excited that someone was here who cared about these things. And then they've all really tried to be supportive. So yeah, I think that's one thing that's nice, that the art scene is really collaborative and people try to help each other.
Some shout outs here for Canadian women watching this. Who are some of the Canadian artists we should be watching?
Let's see. Well, Amanda Rowe Denizer. Amanda was our very first artist. She's from Nova Scotia, and she got her MFA from the University of Waterloo, and she's gone on to have exhibitions here in Nova Scotia. She's going to be in an exhibition at KWAG this summer, and her work has appeared on the cover of Room magazine, which is a great literary and art magazine based in Vancouver. And I think she's someone whose career is taking off, who we're going to see a lot of in the years to come. Michelle Purchase, who is a local artist, who I've met through Kafka. She's a printmaker. I love her work. Who else? We have some really fun stuff from Jordan Stewart, who's a graduate student at UW, Lauren Prusky, who's also a graduate student at UW. I really love Sarah Kernahan's work. She does really interesting things with abstraction and drawing, and so I think she's also someone who is just going to sort of become more and more famous. We also had an exhibition with Natalie Hunter, who got her MFA at UW. She's a conceptual photographer, and she uses analog photography, which, you know, fewer and fewer people are doing now, but she uses like kind of analog cameras and color filters and takes the work we showed were photographs she took of KW's Bridgeport neighborhood. And, you know, and they were fascinating. And so I see she's getting sort of more and more exhibitions here in Hamilton. And then Melissa Dougherty is an artist who's, I'd say, fairly well established in Waterloo, and she does incredible landscape paintings. They're sort of aerial landscape paintings, and there's sort of very subtle comments on the Group of Seven, and I think the kind of masculine tradition of Canadian landscape painting, sort of critiquing that. So I think, and Malika Hashemi, who's a young artist who just graduated from the University of Waterloo, who's going to do a project for our series with Kafka, which is called Lush Vitrine. I think the University of Waterloo is just producing, you know, some incredible female graduates, and they're going to be doing great things in the arts in Canada.
Isn't that interesting? Because when you think of University of Waterloo, you think of engineering, right? Like it's the MIT of Canada. And meantime, they actually have an incredible arts program. A fine arts program.
Yeah, and I've met a lot of faculty from the English department who are great. Laurie's English department is amazing. You know, they have some wonderful writers. So yeah, there's other stuff going on here for sure. And it's just kind of trying to find a foothold.
Now, I know you helped support the Women's March here in Waterloo Region. Do you consider yourself a feminist?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you think, how are we doing in Canada as an American perspective looking in on Canada? What is our...
I have to say, in the last few months, to be honest, I think maybe not great. I was utterly devastated by Donald Trump's win.
Weren't we all?
Yeah, and I guess thinking back, you know, as a white woman, I've tried to become more aware of the privilege that I've enjoyed, and the perspective that I shouldn't have been surprised. You know, I shouldn't have been blindsided by his win, and that I should have been more aware of the racism and sexism and things that, you know, my friends who are people of color were dealing with kind of all this time. So first I was shocked by his win, and now I'm surprised that, you know, Doug Ford is doing really well, and I'm very concerned about kind of what that means and what's happening. And yeah, it's been, you know, I think there's a stereotype, Americans have a stereotype that Canadians are always really nice and really polite. And I have met, you know, countless extremely nice, polite Canadians, but unfortunately, unfortunately, there are definitely a lot of sexist and racist Canadians out there too. And it is a little scary, I guess, seeing how many of these people are out there, at least in Ontario. So I think that the systemic issues that are kind of at play in the States seem like they're maybe as bad in Canada, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing people should follow you, because you shout this stuff out on social. You've become very active. So were you always an activist, or is this just something that you've now you're finding your voice?
Become more so. I think that I was really, I guess I do feel ashamed when I think back to how complacent I was, leading up to the 2016 election. And I was like, oh, well, of course Hillary's going to win. And, I don't really
thought that. Yeah, we all thought that.
But then, when I as I kept reading about it, I was like, I shouldn't have been this way, and I should have done more. And I think that I've tried to realize, at least my family, even though my family will be affected by Donald Trump's policies or like Doug Ford's policies if he wins, we're not the people who would be hurt the most. And so I guess I'm trying to think about, how can I use my privilege to kind of help other people and sort of make space for other people.
Do you want to give a shout out on your social channels so people can follow you?
Sure. So we are Open Sesame Shop, all one word, on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter we're Open Sesame KW.
And what about your personal Twitter? Are you just using Open Sesame to make those?
I actually gave up my personal account, which I'd had for many years, which I started as a journalist in Chicago. I think I just found myself feeling maybe a bit depressed at the kind of I think that social media gets a bad rap, and even Twitter has been really useful to me because I try to follow a lot of Indigenous scholars and journalists, and journalists and scholars who are people of color in Canada and in the States. And so I've learned a lot from following these people on Twitter, and that's why I stay on Twitter. But I think I found it easier maybe to do so sort of through my business persona than my kind of personal account. And even on Facebook, I think I'm more active as Open Sesame than sort of as myself.
I like that idea. Like, I spoke to someone about that the other day, about curating who you actually follow, and that you can have an entirely different perspective. Mm-hmm. But I think also, to that point, that's why we thought Hillary was going to win, because we were all drinking the same champagne, thinking that this was going to be the first time we had a female president. And that's, I think, one of the reasons I was so shocked. I had no idea that, there was this undercurrent. Now, that said, I do think that there's, you have to keep your eyes open, but there's a lot of really good information out there on social channels. You just have to know where to find it.
Mm-hmm. But I guess it is sort of surprising to me still, because, I keep seeing kind of polls saying that Doug Ford is doing well. And I'm like, I don't know anyone who's planning to vote for him. Where are these people? Like, who are these people? So I guess this time around, I definitely want to feel like I'll have done everything I could to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, Lauren, I will challenge you. I interviewed a few conservative candidates on this Women's March podcast. Now, at that point, they were still in a leadership race, but they're still running. And that was sort of one of the questions I had. Like, do you still run because you believe in the party's policies, even if you don't agree with the leader? And I guess that's where they fall. Or maybe, I don't want to speak for them, but I guess that's how it happens.
Yeah, I suppose it's even especially from running Open Sesame, from the people I've met here, I think, I talked before about how a lot of our success is due to our community and the help we've gotten, and kind of how we were able to organize and team up with other people. And I suppose that's really become my worldview. Especially as a parent, it's really frustrating to me to see how, inaccessible childcare has been to people. And I think that, like, we as a society need to be stepping up and enabling, maybe doing more, especially for families and, for people who are taking care of small kids, or their parents, or, whatever it is. And that needs to be part of feminism. And so that's something, I guess we're trying to support here.
I love it. That's great. Anything else you want to add? Tell the women of Canada.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, I think there's a saying that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism. And I think that's true. But I feel like until like the socialist revolution comes, one of the best things you can do is give your money to women and, you know, white women and women of color. And so we try to highlight their books and products and things like that at Open Sesame. And so I think especially when it comes to children's books, like we are just living in a golden age of children's books by, you know, authors with a huge range of experiences. And I would say seek those out, and there are great resources out there now online that can help you find these things. And, you know, it's not perfect, but I think that just sort of voting with your dollars and just, you know, seeking out products and cultural experiences that that are being produced by people from marginalized groups is really important, and that's something we try to help people do at Open Sesame.
So they can find it on your website?
Yes, so we have an online shop, opensesameshop.com, and we'll ship to anywhere in Canada or the United States.
Lauren Weinberg, it has been my pleasure.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thank you. And we'll include your Open Sesame Twitter, and so that people can follow you and hear all the great stuff. Keep powering on in solidarity. All right. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in to listen. Your comments are welcome and encouraged. Please subscribe to our Women's March Canada channel, and you'll receive an update every time we upload a new podcast, which is usually on a Friday. Our mission across Canada is to stand together in solidarity with our partners and children for the protection of our rights, our safety, our health, and our families, recognizing that our vibrant and diverse communities are the strength of our country. This is the Women's March Canada podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Women's March CDA and on our website at womensmarchcanada.com. I'm Melissa Darrell. Have a great day.